You need to be scared. You need to be concerned. And you need to get your butts moving out of New Orleans right now.
After hitting western Cuba, where it caused floods and power cuts, Hurricane Gustav has now passed into the Gulf of Mexico. The plight of India's 2 million flood victims' rescue efforts are hampered by continuing heavy rains. Welcome to BBC News, for me, Alistair Yates. The mayor of New Orleans has ordered the evacuation of the city as Hurricane Gustav continues to power its way towards the Gulf Coast of the United States. It comes 3 years after the city was devastated by Hurricane Katrina. The eye of the powerful storm has now passed into the Gulf of Mexico, though it does continue to batter the western tip of Cuba with winds of up to 204 kilometers per hour. Announcing the evacuation of his city, the mayor of New Orleans, Ray Nagin, gave this grim warning.
This is the mother of all storms. This storm is so powerful and growing more powerful every day that I'm not sure we have seen anything like it. This storm is so powerful it went from last night or early this morning from a Category 1 to a Category 3. Then it jumped to a Category 4. But what is more frightening to me and to others is that the footprint of this storm went from 300 miles to 900 miles in a matter of hours. This is the real deal. This is not a test. For everyone who is out there thinking that they can ride this storm out, I have news for you. That would be one of the biggest mistakes you can make in your life. And let me just emphasize once again to my citizens on the West Bank, you were spared during Katrina. This is not that type of event. This storm is not coming to the east. It's coming to the West Bank first. Jefferson and Orleans Parish residents, this storm is headed your way. You need to be scared. You need to be concerned. And you need to get your butts moving out of New Orleans right now. I am announcing today that we are ordering a mandatory evacuation of the city of New Orleans starting in the morning at 8 a.m. on the West Bank. We want our West Bank people to move out. We want you to move out quickly and not play around with this. We're going to give you 4 hours to evacuate. Then the East Bank, we are ordering a mandatory evacuation at noon. If you are stubborn enough, if you are not taking this as seriously as we need you to take it, and if you decide to stay, you are on your own.
Well, earlier I spoke to our correspondent Matthew Price, who's in New Orleans.
What they fear is, even if it isn't as bad as Hurricane Katrina, even if it doesn't hit, they fear the criticism if they don't react in the strongest possible way. I think the point at the moment is, do not repeat the mistakes of Hurricane Katrina. The local authorities, the state authorities, and indeed the federal authorities are all trying to make sure that those mistakes aren't repeated. They're trying to ensure that everybody gets out of this city. They're trying to ensure that if there is flooding or if the hurricane indeed does hit the city, which at the moment weather forecasters aren't saying it's going to hit directly, they're making sure that they are best prepared as they can be. And that's really all they can do.
And Matthew, presumably that's all because of that very slow response to what took place after Hurricane Katrina hit, and indeed that very slow response from the federal government. Indeed.
Remember, 3 years ago, this weekend, Hurricane Katrina hit. More than 1,500 people were killed either in the storm or because of its aftermath. And the general feeling was that had the state, had the city and had the country been more prepared for Hurricane Katrina, then those large numbers of people would not necessarily have died. It was felt that basically the very slow response, especially from the White House, made the effect of the storm far, far worse. Now, President Bush has already been actively engaged in this one. He has also made sure that his officials are actively engaged. There is very much a feeling here on the ground in New Orleans that all of the local, national authorities are working very closely together and better than they were 3 years ago to try and avoid a repeat of the effects of Hurricane Katrina.
And after Katrina, of course, they strengthened all those levees, didn't they, Matthew? Do they feel that they're strengthened now to the point that a hurricane like this one might not actually get through them?
Well, I think the general feeling is at the moment that the measures they wished to bring in after Hurricane Katrina have still not been fulfilled. That is a project that is taking many, many years. It is a difficult engineering project. I was reading a report that suggested that the levees and the protection for this city, which 50% of it, around 50% of it is below sea level, which was basically the problem after Hurricane Katrina, the levees and the systems that try to stop water coming into the city are basically back at the level that they were just prior to Hurricane Katrina. So obviously the fear is that if this storm is indeed, as Ray Nagin said, the mother of all storms, that it's worse than Katrina, and if indeed it is heading this way, and there are a lot of ifs there, but if it is heading this way, then the fear must be that some of the problems associated with Hurricane Katrina may reoccur.
And our correspondent Michael Voss is in Havana. He says there is a real risk that Hurricane Gustav could move to a Category 5.
There's still a further risk of damage or flooding from the backwinds. You may remember with Katrina 3 years ago, it passed New Orleans, and then it was the backwinds that did all the damage later. So I think there's still a lot of trepidation here. We probably won't know the full extent of just what Hurricane Gustav has done to Cuba until first light on Sunday. It's the middle of the night here now. But certainly when it first struck land here, it was on a smaller island called the Isle of Youth, just off the southern coast, and we've been told that there were many people injured on this island, no numbers and no reports of fatalities. Apparently all the roads there were swept away, homes are underwater, and reports of boats washed up in the town centre.
Michael, what we should understand is, I mean, it's surprising, isn't it, that this hurricane is 900 miles wide, possibly. Maybe you could sort of get all this into perspective for us.
Well, you have the eye of the storm, and then these very fierce winds, and then this huge circular movement, so that you can be a long way from the eye of the storm and then still be inundated with tropical downpours. Some of the worst flooding that's been reported in Cuba is nowhere near the western tip. It's in the center part of the island, in Camagüey province, Sierra de Avila, where in the mountains there's talk of flash floods, of rivers bursting their banks, and this is a long, long way from the eye of the storm.
And then just finally then, Michael, is there a fear that it is building up, that it might actually get to a grade 5?
Yes, the Gulf of Mexico, the waters between Cuba and the United States are quite warm at the moment, and it's warm, deep water which fuels hurricanes, particularly if they're moving quite slowly, which all the way through Gustav has. So now the speed's dropped just a little bit. It's still a Category 4, but apparently down to about 140 miles an hour as opposed to 150. Down about sort of 10-15 kilometers now. But once it gets back out to sea, I think there is a very real risk that it could move up to the Category 5, which is, of course, the most most deadly and the fastest and most dangerous of all the hurricanes.
The BBC's Michael Voss. Relief workers hampered by heavy rain are still trying to get aid to more than 2 million people made homeless by floods in northern India and neighbouring Nepal. The worst flooding to hit the region in half a century started when the Koshi River burst a dam and started flowing about 50 miles off course. Well, one of the worst hit areas is near the village of Madhapura, from where Damien Grammaticus reports.
Frail and elderly, another victim of this calamity. Carried to dry land, he could barely stand when he reached safety. We watch today a tide of people on the move. 2 million have been made homeless, 1 million may still be stranded. All our children are stuck on a rooftop. One of my grandsons fell into the water. He was swept away, says Dindayal Sahu. They came with only what they could carry, whatever thing they judged most precious. Just a few possessions. The gifts from local people are the first dry food some have had in a week. And still they kept on coming. All day it's been like this. So many people fleeing the floods, it's impossible to keep track of them. After just a few minutes, you lose count of how many there are. These are some of the poorest people in one of the poorest parts of India. They've lost everything, and the floodwaters are still rising. Today, the army arrived with 4 inflatables. When we were here yesterday, there were no boats. It's an improvement, but a marginal one. And this was the only helicopter we saw all day. So the crowds of the hungry and homeless are growing angry at how little aid they've had. I haven't eaten anything for 4 or 5 days. The boats have not been taking the poorest people. We had to walk 5 kilometres to get here, says Anita Devi. A squalid camp is the only place many have to go now. No water, no toilets, people and animals side by side. There's nobody running this place. No regular food supplies, just these occasional donations. Not enough to feed all. Anil Yadav and his family have been here for 8 days now.